Let us establish our location. We will start from the line that begins with word gvul. It's about a third from the bottom of the page, Lamed Ches. We already started this, but this is where we're going to start today. We were talking about the Ayin that Sechel is b'chinas hamshocha, and we had a little bit of a difficulty. It says hamshocha means that it has a relative presence. But we said all along that human seichel is pure, is essential. It's not reactive like will happen to the animal. It's real seichel. So how is this? What is the clarity in this? The way we can relate to it and understand it is as follows. For example, we talk in terms of lo signoiv. Lo signoiv is a seichel principle. You must not interfere with other people's property. Now, ultimately, like we say many times, what assigns ownership to a person? Through ownership, this is the creator of the world. This is because the Rebbeinu owns the whole world, and he created it, and he assigns property, he assigns the right to ownership. Now, looking at it from its inception, in the absolute truth of the godly ownership of creation of the world, the whole phenomenon of gneva, it does not exist, because everything is owned by the same owner. Gneva is only when there are multiple owners. This in from multiple owners is not on the fundamental reality. This is on some level of development of hamshoch, and this is where the sechel first begins to function. This is what sechel can be applied to. The essence of that is above sechel. So this is Sechel atzmi. That's what we're trying to delve into. But the Sechel, as we understand it, don't steal. Where does that begin? It begins from the point where the stealing is possible, which means that this is not an essential truth, the absolute truth. It is on the functional truth. Even though within the realm of the functional truth, there is an element of the essential truth. But as we said, who assigns ownership, who gives the right for ownership, is because there is an original creator. But this is not what the Sechel applies to. The Sechel applies to the actual multiple owners. And there it is a true Sechel. We can understand that Sechel at that level, and that is what Sechel is applicable. Now we are talking about a Sechel that is above this Sechel Bepinas Hamshach. A Sechel, the inception of the Sechel. This is what's called Sechel Ho Atzmi HaKol Be'atz. So, we will get into this inside, but using this illustration, we will just step into it briefly. We say that the principle is like this. Everything is owned by one owner. From that perspective, everything it has to be real and it cannot be confused. So therefore, if this one owner will assign multiple owners, that assignment cannot be violated. Because ultimately it all comes from the same owner. This is the Sechel at its inception level, rather than on its functional level. This is what makes you say that this is what's called the Koyah Sechel Ho Atzmi. And that's my nefesh. As we said in the past, a very fine point, that the principle, I hope I don't lose you, please, the principle of chochmah, pure chochmah, is not that this is true, but the pure chochmah is that truth exists. That everything ultimately comes from truth, not, there's no relative element in this at all. This is what's called the etzem ha-sechel, the way it's called in the etzem ha-nefesh. That Sechel has no bounds. It's not based on any kind of boundaries. It goes all the way to the essential truth. Okay, now we're going to go inside over here. As I said, we are on the line that begins to put gvul at the end of that line. And essentially what it says right before is that just the etzem ha-nefesh is bli gvul, the koyach that is part and parcel of the etzem ha-nefesh is also bli gvul. V'zehu shemavur b'mokim machir. And this brings us up to the principle that's explained elsewhere. That when Sechel Giluyim, Sechel expressions are drawn, mehakoyach hasichli ho'atzmi. If the Sichlim are drawn not from the Sechel HaGolui, Sechel B'chinas Hamshocha, a Sechel that is within a context, but from Sechel Ho'atzmi, HaKoyach HaSechel Ho'atzmi. When is this occur? When does Yiluim Sichlim drawn from Kiyah Yuli HaKoyach HaSechel Ho'atzmi, Vehu, and that occurs, Alidei Koyach Oyer Choyzer. This is by the effect of the koyach oyer choyzer. We discussed yesterday a little bit in oyer choyzer. Oyer choyzer principally means that the oyer normally is yosher. Like we know, a light that travels in one direction. That's yosher. And light on its functional level can only travel in one direction, the direction that it was sent out for. But because this light has a source that is beyond light, a source in the etzem, this is why when there is an obstruction on the light, that will not cause the light to dissipate. But then you're revealing a deeper element in the light, what's called Oyer Choizer. This is called Koyach Oyer Choizer. As in the example the Gemara said, Talmid HaMachkim Es Rabbi, a Talmid that wisens up and brings out the wisdom from his Rebbe. The Talmid HaMachkim Es Rabbi is a Talmid who does not fully comprehend the Sechel the way the Rav presents it, the Oyer Yosher. But nevertheless, he presents the point that he cannot understand. He's not just plain saying, I don't understand. That's not the Talmid HaMachkim Es Rabbi. Talmid HaMachkim Es Rabbi is one who expresses what's bothering him. In other words, he wants to understand the Sechel at his level, and at his level, this is what's missing. And that is Machkim Es Rabbi. This is where it elicits from the Rav a deeper source to be able to bring out the Sechel in a manner that it should be understandable even at that level. So this is what's called Koyach Oyer Choizer. So there, Yuchal Liyois Bozeh Giluyim Ad Ein Shir. There, in that, they could be Giluyim, expressions of Sechel. Sechel Dikei Giluyim. Ad Ein Shir, to the point without any limit. Which essentially means the following, as we explained many times recently. The Talmud says, this is what's bothering me. I don't understand it. The Rav then recognizes that even though this Talmud is not capable at this point, doesn't have that refinement of his Sechel to understand this Sechel at the Sechel level, but as you said, but he's still human. He still has the Sechel, the capacity to understand it. But you have to bring out that capacity. This is like you said, in a classic example, the man who is lying in the gutter in his own dirt. And he forgot completely that he's a human being. But you know that he is human. And with this knowledge you can find the wisdom with which to arouse that, to bring out that humanity. This is the Talmid HaMachkim Es Rabbi. This is where the Rav has to engage, has to touch in himself the source element of the Sechel, because that's the only thing that's available in a Talmud. The source element is available. The function element is not available. He doesn't understand. He has to touch the Talmud at a more fundamental level. There, this fundamental level knows no bounds. This is what's called the absolute element of Sechel. It's not relative, it's not within a context. Like we said just now before. Yes, in context, Loisignev means there are multiple owners and each one has his ownership. If someone needs further understanding This ownership is insignificant. So you took this, I take this, so I'll take it away. He says, no, but this owner is assigned by the original owner. You cannot, there is no existence but for the fact that there is an original owner. And that you cannot avoid. You cannot bypass. You can say, you own this, now I own it. But you cannot take it away from the original owner. And that his statement remains that it belongs to him, not to you. No matter what you do. When you go down to that fundamental level, there is no limit. And it's not dependent on circumstance. This is the principle, interesting halacha. Karka ein nigzeles. Karka becheskes bi'oleho eimedes. Karka, land, you can steal and rob a metaltim, a movable object. But land you cannot rob. It's an amazing thing. Land is totally standing independent of the person, of the owner. Piece of property, a watch I can hold in my hand. I can really claim it's mine because it's in my hand. Land always remains outside of me. I can never get hold of it. And yet, if you own a piece of property, it cannot be robbed from you. No matter what happens, no matter how many generations, as we mentioned halachically.
Well, in case of a war.
War is a different thing. There's a halachic principle in war. Correct. A melech, there is halachic as far as the melech. Yes, a melech goes out to war. He can actually acquire the property.
You said that the Talmud is missing something, that he can't understand the Sechel at his level, and therefore that then the Rav kind of wakes up the Talmud. The Rav has to go back to the essence of Sechel. How does that help the Talmud understand it at his level? Doesn't the Talmud now just understand it at the essence level?
From that, once he can relate to the essence level, then there is already hamshacha from that. Now
he can apply
that. Opens up a view. Like we say, we have multiple illustrations of this experience. We say that the sun, I spoke about yesterday or the day before, the sun, what's called etzem behiri. See, it's explained etzem behiri. It's behirius. It's not just light. It's an etzem behiri, and this is why wherever the sun appears, automatically everything turns into light. On an essential level. And we said the difference between light and day. It becomes day, it's not light. It's not just that it brings visibility, it changes the entire atmosphere. So then, there's a Talmud who cannot relate to this fine thing. It's still light, still basically what I see. It's still like sometimes it's still energy emanating from the sun, and it makes me able to see. So then you have to go down, as we have many times, to the more fundamental level and say, okay, it is energy emanating from the sun. The energy is created by consumption of fuel. Do you see any reduction in the fuel? If there is consumption of fuel, you should be able to see a reduction in fuel. Do you ever see fuel that is being consumed without being reduced? Already, Aren't you a little fast? Okay. So what is this? This is going down to the more fundamental and says, oh yeah, that's an oddity. Doesn't make sense. There must be something more real to it. And with this, you go down to his physical level, and from there he begins to see something more subtle. And Mitzvah says that from there, from etzem ha-sechel, Sechel o atzmi, yuchal liyad b'zeh giluyim ad ein shir. There is no limit because it is not contextual. That Sechel is not contextual. V'hainu. And the point is, the reason for that, lefi shemitziyusam hu, it is due to the fact that the mitziyus, the presence of that Sechel, hu me'akeach ho atzmi habilti mugbal, is in fact from the keach ho atzmi of Sechel, habilti mugbal, that is not limited. Al kain, and for this reason, ein hagbala gam behagiluyim ha'yistafus. This is why there is no hagbala in the giluyim and yistafus, the giluyim and the expressions and yistafus and the ramifications of that Sechel, because it is rooted in keach ha'atzmi, in keach ho atzmi ha'sechel. Huh? I'm sorry, what? And hagbala gam behagiluyim ha'yispashtus. Hispashtus is ramifications, what things it affects.
So once
Sometimes,
the Rav opens the Talmud up, so pretty much the Talmud could then really theoretically understand any of the Sechlim. That's the idea.
Well, he would still definitely need guidance and teaching, but then he was able to understand the teaching of the Rav.
At whatever level, I mean, it seems to be saying that at whatever level the Sechel of the Rav is. Once, in other words, once he hits the atzmi of the
Eventually he can get to all the yom of Sechel Horav. But first he has to open up his Sechel to be able to relate to Sechel altogether. Because he said, in Gashmis there is no Sechel. He's not even used to think with Sechel. And even when you point to him, like we said, this Indian, commonly when you say, oh, doesn't reduce you say, well, because you can't see it. You have to have an essential Sechel insight to be able to relate even to that. Like we said, the principle of chochmah is that there is a truth. If you don't sense that there is a truth, then it won't help. And then the koyach oyer chayzer has to resort to other means than Sechel. Hit him over the head. Wake him up. Because Sechel is not going to touch him.
And that's still considered Chayzer.
That's still considered Chayzer. This is what we mentioned. The Gemara says that a Talmud, a Yeshit Lechnei Rabbi, has to be in total bittul. And he said there is different categories, experiences that he goes through. And if his Rab really screams at him, and the Talmud remains sitting in his seat, this Talmud will make it. In other words, if he gets hit over the head and he remains sitting, then the much more this guy, he's the real thing. Okay, let's continue. In other words, we're going to be pointing out that the koyach ha-sechel ho-atzmi is also sechel. Like we said, it's also chochmah. There's a certain sense to it. Like we said, chochmah has a sense that there is a truth. And if you don't have that sense, and your whole mitzvah is imbued only in the tangible gashmi, in the relative gashmi, it's not going to help. And you have to be first drawn out from that. And this is what he says, Mikol Mokoim, but nevertheless, Gam Zeh, even that, Be'emes hu bebchinas hagbol. In truth, it also has an element of hagbol. Im heyois, for although shehakoyach ho'atzmi hu bilti mugvul be'etz, even though that the koyach ho'atzmi, this koyach which is atzmi, not a hamshoch, that is representative of nefesh itself, is etzem not mugvul. The koyach ho'atzmi is not mugvul. Yet still, hashpoaz hasichliim hanimtzoim imenu, the sichlim that are surface and come forth from it, hareya b'bchinas gvul. The sichlim that are drawn from this, by definition, sichlim are b'bchinas gvul. And this is why there is no such thing as you can compel somebody to see a seichel. No such thing. No matter how clearly it is presented, with all the methods of Oyechoizen and so forth. There's no way you can compel it because it's still sichliyim. It's still the union from gvul. And if he refuses to see it, then of course he will not see it. This is the principle that is commonly known. Chassidus speaks about it, more mentioned many times. You can only understand a seichel if you want to understand it. This is what enables you to understand, bring out your koyach seichel. You cannot sit and say, prove it to me while I am refusing to understand it. There is no such thing. This is not seichel. This is not seichel. Seichel is a koyach hanefesh. It's a sensitivity. And sensitivity is something that there's a living entity behind that sensitivity. If the living entity refuses to live, to experience his life, he wants to stay lifeless and say, prove it to me, there's no way. Yeah.
So the hashpas sichlim that is referring to here, this is the hashpas sichlim of the orchot, like the very
that
deep,
come as a result of the chayes. Okay, this is the last chance. We have another minute or so. Okay. So the resource itself is built in mugbal, be'etzem. Like we say, resource is built in mugbal. There is no way that a human being can lose being a human being, using our metaphor. There's no way, no matter what he does to himself. But is he going to become sensitive to being a human being? That's chances. That's not necessarily true. At some point in time, he has to be willing to respond to a human call. And if he's not willing, it's not going to help. Nishma said that it will rak accept shelagabe hashvoas hasechel habo b'derech yosher. Relative in comparison to the seichel that comes b'derech yosher, the hainu mikoyach hamaskil, which is the seichel that comes from koyach hamaskil, from a functioning level of seichel, harei b'chinas b'li gvul. That seichel doesn't have those limits. But nevertheless, there is an element of limit there too. And this is the limit for this morning's shir. Be well, have a good day. Hatzlocha.
Sabano,